Well, this is going to be an anomaly. I'm starting off with the story this week. I'm going to start with a historical story that deals with the theme of today's podcast, personal responsibility. Let me start with a question. Dan, who was the last president who said they were sorry to this country?
Whew. Well, it's not the current one. I know that.
No.
Clinton?
A lot of people say Clinton, of course, because with the scandal, the sex scandal.
Yeah, but I'm gonna say that he
did not.
He never did apologize. Nope.
He was very, very. I did not have sex with that woman. Well, he defined sex in a different way than most people, but anyway, that's Oxford Rhodes Scholar,
as well as the verb to be.
To be, yep. Bright man.
So Nixon then?
A lot of people say Nixon. David Frost got him to just say, "I apologize." He did not say he was sorry.
Okay.
JFK, the Bay of Pigs.
Wow.
The Bay of Pigs.
Interesting.
And a little some historical factoids with this one. Who did he run against?
Goldwater, right?
Nope.
Oh, that was the next election then.
Ran against Nixon.
Oh, right.
And it was the first time that they had television debates. And Nixon did not, he did not, the lights that old boy he was sweating. He had it looked like a 2-day growth or at least a day's growth of a beard. So my dad would say he was nervous as a whore in church. He looked like, well, he lost.
No hair dye though, right?
no hair dye. Kennedy was cool, calm, and collective. Now, what you also got to recall here, or for the historical buffs, Eisenhower, the old supreme commander, right? The Allied forces. He was our president. Nixon was the vice president during the 50s. He didn't do one stump speech for him. So the greatest, I would say, and I pause here because it's we're in an awkward stage right now. Transition of power is between the president-elect and the current president, and that really demonstrates democracy at its best when there's a smooth transition. Now, we won't get into what's going on today, but at that time, Eisenhower said, "Look, I will." With Kennedy, he put his transition team together, and they were reporting back to him, and he says, well, how does the man make decisions? Well, he's going to make decisions with just 3 or 4 close confidants. And that's a problem, because you can be, everyone as a president, they say the only person you really can trust is your wife, because everyone else will have a hidden agenda.
Of course.
And you got to be careful of their agendas, right? And so the day, inauguration day is January 20th. That's always, the president, outgoing president and his wife, the first lady, they meet the incoming president and future first lady at the steps of the White House, and they're going to give them a tour of their new home. Eisenhower put Kennedy in, got him into the Oval Office. He says, let's make no bones about it. You think, I don't, you ran a good race. I will give you that, but I believe you've just been given everything from the old man. There's quite a bit of age difference between the two.
Sure.
Well, he says, look, see that chair there? And he's pointing to the oval desk chair, and he says, you can't sit, you're not going to sit in it yet, but tomorrow you will not know the enormity of this position you're just going to take over until you have to make your first decision. And on that, what my team is telling me, you're only depending on 3 to 4 people in their viewpoints, and then you're going to make your decision. He says, I got to tell you, you're running a grave mistake there. what from my personal experience, I bring all my generals in, I bring my chiefs of staff in, and everyone, and I say, here's the issue, and here's the problem, or here's what we got to resolve. Let's hear, and I let everyone give their viewpoints. And do that to filter, so it gives me, and I don't make the decision normally if it's a big decision. You make reversible decisions quickly, irreversible decisions slowly. So if it's a big decision, I'm going to wait on it and I'll weigh in on everything. Bay of Pigs come. He did not listen to everyone and overconfident. So he got his ratings, and his rating was over 70% prior to the Bay of Pigs. It just plummeted. And he tells Bobby, who he elected as his attorney general, his brother, and he says, I'm going to get on the television tonight and I'm going to apologize and say I'm sorry to the American citizens, and I'm going to let them know what I've learned. Bobby says, no, you can't do that. That's that's going to sign of weakness. He says, no, I'm doing it. And he did it. Next day, polls are way back up, and he and Bobby are in the Oval Office. He says, Bobby, can you believe it? This is a country of second chances. All you've got to do is say you're sorry. And look what happens. Now, the moral of that story, taking personal responsibility, when you know you've made a mistake, write it as quickly as possible. Make your amends, write it as quickly as possible. Just like last week we talked about integrity. If you have integrity, the byproduct of integrity is you become trustworthy. The byproduct of personal responsibility, it's inspirational to your people, because particularly even today, more and more people don't take personal responsibility. Now later, it was classic. He says, okay, we're not done here. He says, call up the old man, Eisenhower. Tell him we're going to meet him at Camp David. I got to, besides I said, look, I'm sorry to the American citizens. I've got to let them know from here on out, I'm going to be going to the old man, because the old man, when he left office, this last time a president, and none since, or ever, have had a polling rating of 60% or greater. He had actually 64%.
That's really interesting.
Right? Yeah, and they go to Camp David, and it's a classic Associated Press photo. There's the old man, Ike. He's got his hands folded across his chest, and there's Kennedy, and he's looking down at the young man. So JFK says, I'm going to go to the feet of the mountain. I'm going to go to the whooping post, and they're going to know I took my lickings and I've learned. And it's a classic AP photo. So that today is a kickoff of our conversation we're going to have about value of personal responsibility.
That is a great story to start out episode 39 of the Valuability Podcast. Another values-based episode on personal responsibility. The Valuability Podcast is for financial professionals, business owners, and anyone interested in financial planning, business, leadership, and personal development. We believe that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. My name is Danforth Fleek. I was a financial advisor and wholesaler for over 20 years. I'm joined each week by my co-host, friend, and mentor, Philip Simonson. Philip was in financial services for over 40 years as an advisor, field leader, sales trainer, and was in senior management covering advisor development, field operations. It's a question I've been meaning to ask you, Philip, as we approach February, which is my dog Roger's birthday. He's turning 6.
Wow.
I know, already 6 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have gone through the cycle. You primarily owned the hunting dogs early on, and then at a certain point, Lisa said, no more puppies. I'm not raising puppies for your hunting party anymore. Then
the queen has spoken. Maybe corgis.
Right. Then I got my Vizsla, and Garrett got his yellow lab, Boone. But Parker, your youngest son, has been talking about getting a beast for a while.
Yeah,
What
well,
is the status on that?
well, he got the corgi.
He did get a corgi.
Jep. He's cute.
Excellent.
Yeah.
No, we like the short, long dogs.
Yes, we
I'm a
do.
dachshund lover. I
Hmm.
don't think we've talked about that. My family dog is the dachshund, and ended up getting a Vizsla for hunting purposes, which has been a great choice. Fun. Definitely kept me more active. So excellent. So yeah. Interesting. All right. Last I heard, they were looking at Vizslas and
Griffins,
chocolate labs,
chocolate
and
lab, and
ended
a
up with
griffin.
the corgis.
My
So.
brother Bob, Uncle Bob, got him on a corgi when he was up here this summer. But what's your thoughts on personal responsibility?
I mean, obviously, like most topics on this side of the equation, I learned almost everything about, especially from a business standpoint, from you. And so my outlook is quite similar to yours. Again, going back to the same conversation as around the integrity, I didn't have the greatest modeling of personal responsibility when I was a kid. My dad got into an accident on base with a military vehicle, with alcohol in the vehicle, and I lost control of the car, went off the road, hit a fence.
Mm.
And for an officer, that's, I mean, career suicide, right? DUI, like, in that position because of your responsibility, because of your leadership. If you make that kind of mistake, you're pretty much done. And my dad hit it. He walked to a payphone, called someone that came and picked him up. He drove home and locked himself in his bedroom. And when his commanding officer showed up, he had showered and was trying to get sober, and did enough that he could dodge the fact that he had been under the influence. So that's my childhood framing of personal responsibility. Just duck it.
I'd like to expound on that a little bit.
I just, to wrap up, say that definitely followed me going through school. I was terrified of ever being wrong, or, well, being wrong was more of an intellect thing, disliking being wrong. But I think it's tied to the same things as we talked about in previous episodes, such as, the way my view of money developed, in that it was constantly this battle to prove myself to my dad. And very much the same thing going through high school, trying to avoid getting in trouble, seeing any means of avoiding punishment as open for an avenue for me. And so I did a lot of that. I did a lot of the, white lying and maneuvering and reframing of things in order not ever to get in trouble. And you picked up on it very early on, and pretty much squashed it. It's going back to that same conversation that we had
last week.
Yep, when we talked about integrity, that you said, hey, you just got to cut this stuff out. I'm sure you just picked up on it right away, because I would assume at that point that I was still very much like that. Even little things I would dodge. And the other side of that is that with an open environment, I changed relatively quickly and very quickly came to understand the power of that personal responsibility and how it really frees you.
Absolutely, and I've witnessed that, and the you know, you metamorphosized there, no question, and in this personal responsibility, this whole if you're not are you done, Dan? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm okay, yeah, because I was gonna say, our company and, this consulting firm, valuability, we truly believe that if you identify what your values are and that's internal, what's important to you, and then you align those values with the goals and then your decision making, you're going to be able to sustain optimal performance. But these principles or principles slash values that we're talking about here over the next course of the next month or so. We started with integrity. You got personal responsibility. We're going to talk about compassion, forgiveness. If they're universal, and personal responsibility, one of the things if people take it, it's one and own it. And the key word there is, they own it. Then, what it is freeing, just as you said, because what it does, it gets rid of the fear, guilt, remorse, and ultimately, if you don't deal with this thing, shame. We've been talking about excavating my escapades here since I rented that excavator. It's, make an analogy. It's very similar. I'm cleaning up that back 40. I'm excavating little rocks, but those big rocks, and those big rocks, if you don't address the personal responsibility right away, they turn into big rocks, and they can just impede you from moving forward and growing. Now, the as I look at this too, and I heard this, and I wish I can't remember the gentleman's name, but it was someone from Kilty Goldsmith and Boone. They did the situational leadership, and they, top Fortune 100 companies, 80% of them have been through the situational leadership program, and so they know how to assess readiness and that's ability and motivation. But they say the number one indicator if someone is going to be successful in their life is self accountability slash personal responsibility. And you think about it, they're learning how to put themselves in check, and they can hold themselves accountable. And if you know you've made a mistake and you can right it right away, it doesn't turn into those big rocks. And those big rocks, of course, are the fear, the guilt, the remorse, and the shame. And shame, you get the shame. Shame is when, guilt is when you feel badly about your behaviors. Shame is when you feel badly about yourself. And too much shame is not a good thing. That's a death spiral. Little shame's okay because that's going to, keep you from going over some boundaries that aren't healthy. Uh, so this personal responsibility. Now, when do you address it, and how do you address it? What I have personally found with this is, again, do it immediately. Do it face to face. That's usually the best way because it generally it'll yield you the best results because it demonstrates, what, I I'm open. I know I've screwed up. They know the person who's receiving it knows it can't be easy, and they're generally then, just like with the story, this is a country of second chances, and most people will give it, everyone a second chance. So I'd say, do it face to face, and now unless you can't, then all right, then maybe you're not allowed to. And then then some it could be an email, could be a phone call, but
I would say phone call way before an email, right?
thank you, because words have purpose. When we're going to talk about that in the article review, but boy, you're right there because you just what do they say about communication? 70 some percent is non-verbal. 20%, if my statistics are right, are how you say what you say, and the other 10% are the actual words you use.
Different studies showed slightly different things, but overwhelmingly nonverbal is a large part of the communication process. There's a famous, when I was doing phone training for internal wholesalers, we had a call that we used in training where literally you hear the internal talking and the rep says, a minute or so into the conversation, "Are you lying down?" And the internal wholesaler says, no, but I am, like, kicked back in my chair with my feet up on my desk." And the financial advisor says, "Yeah, I can tell. It sounds like you're lying down." And we would always play that for people, and they like, "What?" Like, yes, that stuff does come through. And yes, you can hear that someone does sound like they're lying down, or they sound like they're up and moving around, right?
Yes, and that and that face to face whenever you can do it. And now with Zoom too.
I,
I mean, there's many. It just opens up compassion and goodwill, and ultimately, forgiveness from others. And that's where it becomes freeing, and you're not, tethered down by, you know, all that self talk that you have going between the 6 inches between your ears. And if you're not at peace with yourself, you can't receive what you can't give what you can't receive. So it starts from within. And I would say, and you got to ask yourself, kind of the acid test question. I would, ask yourself, I need to set things straight right now. And if I could, and if and if you can, then you got to do it. And that's the acid test question. And some people also ask, um, when's it harmful to take personal responsibility? Well, and not do it. I would say this in that category. No one has the right to clear one's conscience at the expense of others. So sometimes it's best just to let the lion baby, dog sleep, or let the baby just sleep. Don't wake it up. You got to let go.
so an example of that would be something like, I know something that would, really hurt my business partner, as an example, in their personal life. And I know that exposing that is worse than just keeping it to myself, something like along those lines.
That's a great question, Dan. Now, expound on that. The scenario where you just described, with the business partner. Now, if it's going to cause reputation risk to your organization, then you have to address it. And that's that old saying to, the truth will set you free, but first it's going to make you miserable. But you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to clear the air, and take and make the personal amends here, and try to right the wrong. Now, on the other side, if you happen to, as time has elapsed, and you want to clear your own conscience here, but by doing so, you're going to cause harm to the other person who you're going to have to bring up this scenario to again, etc., then it's not appropriate. When you're causing harm to someone else to benefit you, to clear your conscience, it's probably not a good thing. Way therapist or psychologist, a way to address that and put closure to that is, make the amends and right the wrong by, a cleansing process, right? And write it down. And sometimes you still can't, people have passed on, or you've lost touch with them. All right. Well, some people, what they'll do is they'll just write out a letter. And then after they've got the letter, they'll go out and they'll bury it, or they'll burn it. And that's just kind of the part of the letting go process, so it can free themselves. Did that answer it, Dan?
Yeah, it's got to be pretty rare, though. right? Like a situation where the the personal gain is greater than the potential damage that you're causing. Like I
Yeah,
just I would find it really hard to justify.
oh, yeah, if alcohol's involved and drugs involved, well, then, a lot of people do stupid things and,
Sure.
look, I had an affair with your wife, and he's your best friend. Nah, I don't think let that one go. Why you
Hmm.
don't have to cause more harm to that person.
No, I have a perfect example of this. I knew, not gonna
Don't name
bring up
names.
the individuals, but a specific situation where a person had an affair with their partner's sibling. And I knew this and knew that it would cause a great deal of harm to the person that was cheated on. And I never disclosed it. So, I mean, in that case, it wasn't my conscience that really needed cleansing, but I mean, I guess I understand that from that sense. But if it were me, if that had been me, I would have disclosed it
Mhm.
just because I don't I can't see. I mean, it just kind of seems like no harm, no foul, or what you don't know doesn't hurt you. Like that that seems like a really morally slippery ground to me. Uh, Maybe I'm just too baked into. I found, you know, since, and I don't want to go down this road of like my upbringing made me some, sinister person that was dodging blame at every corner. It was
Mhm.
much more subtle than that. But if I thought I was going to get in trouble, I would make up whatever I needed to make up to get. The famous one was leaving for Christmas break. I wasn't going home. I drank some booze with my roommate in my dorm room. I was actually one of the only upperclassmen at the middle school dorm. I was what's called a proctor. So in
Right.
college, they call it an RA, helping with the middle school kids. And so we had a big room on the third floor all to ourselves. And, it had some people come over and spend the night, and we drank some booze. Obviously, in high school, it's not allowed. So I took the booze bottles and I gave them my roommate, and I said, "Hey, take these down to the car. We'll throw them away." He just took them downstairs and threw them in the garbage. Next day, I'm at my buddy's house up in St. Cloud, which is about 2 hours from where my high school was, for those who don't know Minnesota. And I get a call from the dean. The dean knows where I am, that I went on vacation with this student. So calls me up and says, "Hey, we found these booze bottles in the middle school. We know you're the only ones that would be boozing over there," which actually wasn't true. The middle schoolers boozed quite a bit. But I just danced. Oh, I brought those back from vacation, summer vacation. They're mementos of drinking with my mom. And I literally called my mom and she backed me up, and I didn't get suspended. But the dean, when it all finally came back around, said, "Look, I know you're not telling the truth, but I can't bust you because your mom says it's true. And I know she's covering for you." So,
Well, and that again, you can't have it, the acid test here is the inner peace is what you've got to have, and I think you got to ask the question. So, can I have peace of mind or happiness if I don't do it? If I don't try to make the amends? And you have to ask that because there's the old spiritual maxim, the only way to get rid of guilt and remorse is by making full and equal restitution. And I can, my dad used to say, look, the one thing I can give you, and that is the dignity of your last name. And what that looks like is you should be able to walk down any street in the world, or in this case, any street here in America. But it's, I expanded the world, but because now we're much more global. But and people get around this, 6 degrees of separation. You And what it means is you don't have to. People aren't going to run away from you because you're my son, and they don't want to talk to you. Actually, what should occur is people are coming up to you and say, "You know what? I knew your father. He was a good man. I'm a better person because of your father." So that's what this personal responsibility and that's what it will. That's one of the gifts because you're demonstrating. You've got self accountability. You take responsibility for your actions, and you try to right the wrong. We're all perfectly imperfect. We're going to make those mistakes.
The tie to accountability is huge in this topic for me. I have a really specific memory in my first wholesaling position. Of course, that's a job that you're, out on your own, essentially running your own mini franchise, and it's pretty much, you and your internal, but you put down the meetings that you do, and you got to get yourself up out of bed. You got to get your appointments on the calendar. And if you don't have a super high level of self accountability, you can easily fall into the trap of, oh, yeah, I only got 3 appointments that day, so I'm just going to throw this one on here at the end and, log this appointment that didn't actually happen. And that stuff's really hard for management to figure out, right?
Right.
Like they can't see that. And at one point my boss called me out essentially and said, "Hey, you know what? You focus really too much on just getting your numbers. And of course, you always taught me that if the results aren't there, the only thing you can show is your activity." Right. And so,
Yeah. It's the only thing you control.
right, really big on, hey, I got to hit my targets. I got to hit my activity targets. And we had a really good conversation about it. I said, I think you mistake my focus on it for something that it's not. It really was, to me, I took over my first wholesaling gig was a territory that hadn't been called on for 10 or 15 years. Every time I walked into the office, they didn't even know that my company offered the product that I was responsible to sell. Like they thought I was just a fixed product guy, and I was really representing the variable products. And they literally would say, "Your company has variable products?" I didn't know that. And so it took me a long time to get that up and running. All I had was those numbers to focus on. But it really was, for me, the thing that kept me going was keeping that focus on that self accountability of saying, "Hey, I am gonna hit these targets, get my 20 to 25 appointments a week, make my appointment calls every day." And I often say that had I gotten a different territory, I would never have been as accomplished at that position. If there had been production there, I would have been less self-accountable. But that was really the position that taught me that. And it's now just ingrained. When I make mistakes, it's so much easier to just, it goes back to that same conversation that we had very early on, where you just said, just bring it up, get it out of the way. Look, we all make mistakes. And also differentiating, though, and I learned this early on in compliance, there's a big difference between a mistake of error or a mistake of judgment, right? Like, hey, I goofed this up is different than I made a questionable moral choice.
Right.
And if you live by taking personal responsibility, it really makes that judgment side much easier. Right? You never get to a position where you're like, I could, skirt this, because if you're used to just taking responsibility for things, that it's eventually going to come back, and you're going to end up making that choice of, okay, I gotta confess up here that I made this questionable choice. And so it has an effect, up the line in your decision making, if you really become attuned to that.
I'd agree. And that's where the freeing bit is. And that's also, if personal responsibility, it's just natural to tell the white lies. It's natural to try to put blame on other people. But if we all did that, and there's many that do, and it's to protect your ego, right? That outward persona that we want to show people, uh, that we're successful. We've got a lot of money. We're smart and all that. That's that's just protecting that facade, and that if we keep going down that, then we're not going to get anywhere. Because no one wants to. You're not going to grow, because you're going to those again, that excavating analogy, that you're going to still have all that remorse. You're going to have that pain. You're going to have even some shame with it. And what naturally occurs for a lot of people who have addictions here, they drink or they do the drugs to numb that inner pain, and that can be that's a death spiral. Hopefully, we don't have to go down that road. But if you the likelihood of going down it will be, um, I'm not going to. I think addiction definitely is. It is a genetic thing, and that's a whole different conversation for later on. But my point, I'll just say this, is that if you take personal responsibility and you try to right the wrong, you're going to have a more inner peace, and you're going to find happiness.
The key there too, as well, though, is, and again, I'll reframe this back to my experience when I first started working with you at my first job in the financial services industry. Was you and your partner also created an atmosphere where there was a tremendous amount of trust. I had a tremendous amount of trust in you, that if I was honest and if I did take responsibility, that I wasn't going to be unduly punished.
Right.
And that, to me, was the big thing about why I tried to evade discipline as a child, was that the punishments were often emotionally much greater than the crimes. Right. And so I wanted to avoid that at all costs.
Absolutely. Well, you grew up in an alcoholic environment.
Right.
And there's a lot of our listeners who probably have experienced the same thing. And what I've learned about that is the child then cannot trust, because they don't know what the frick they're gonna is gonna come their way. Because
Right.
and so then you have to protect yourself.
Or even worse, they do know what is going to come their way, and
Yeah.
it's a lot worse than it should be.
Yes.
And I don't want to say that I wasn't tortured, I wasn't abused or anything like that, but I always I always joke the punishment my mom dished out was just extreme disapproval, right? Like the getting my mom's disapproval, silent disapproval, was one of the worst punishments,
Hmm.
as you knew that it was there and lingering, and in the way that she would respond to me. And but learning that having an environment where, like, hey, this is healthy. I messed up. Great. Okay. Very specifically, I've told this story in a previous episode when I lost, made a bad trade. I lost almost 10 grand
Yeah.
for your partner, and
That was
literally was up
back in
all
the
night.
'80s
Yep.
or early '90s, excuse me.
Yep. Yeah, 95, 95, 96 probably.
That's
Definitely
right.
96. I started
Yep,
in 96. So
yep.
yeah, 96, 97. But it was very early on, one of my first trades, and I totally botched it. And of course, got on the wrong side of the trade. And, at that point, I was only making about $20,000 a year. So I was like, oh, I'm going to have to pay all this back. And immediately was just, nope, this is my business. You work for me. I'll absorb that. What did you learn? Don't do it again.
Right.
What are you going to do next time to make sure this doesn't happen again was a big part of that conversation. But then that level of trust just really opened my mind to being able to say, hey, look, you just have to get it out there.
Mhm.
It's so unhealthy. Like, it's just so unhealthy to live in that world of,
Cover up.
and here in the Midwest, the passive aggression, the, not saying what you mean, all of it just kind of stems from not being able to take that personal responsibility.
That environment, again, these universal principles or values, that integrity, it starts there as the leader. You to help create that environment as a leader, you've got to be consistent and predictable. And as to remind our listeners, integrity, is tell the truth, stand up for what's right, and do what you say you're going to do. And if you can do that consistently, then you're going to be predictable as a leader, and that's going to allow people to perform. And also, you reminded me of old Henry Ford. His philosophy was, look, mistakes, we're going to make them, and all they're going to do, the mistakes just give us an opportunity to start over again more intelligently.
Yeah, it is a great lead in to our article for this week: 6 verbs that make you sound weak, no matter your job title. I will post a link to this article both on Twitter and on Facebook. I'll go ahead and read just the 6 verbs. And they are think, need, want, guess, hope, and suppose. Now, my very first reaction to this actually doesn't really have anything to do with the content of how they analyze the verbs. Absolutely, words mean things, and
Oh, words
yes,
mean, yeah, words have purpose. They're
you
good.
need to be careful about the words you use.
Hmm.
But my initial reaction was, I think this article has a false premise, which is that you need to not appear weak. We're all human.
Hmm.
We all are fallible. And in fact, as you were just talking about, from a leadership standpoint, I am often attracted to people that let me in and show their humanity, show their weakness, show their mistakes, who are, responsible for the mistakes that they make. This myth of you have to always be right. And Bobby Kennedy, right? You can't say you're sorry. You can't go out there and look weak. You're the president of the United States. That's not true. And I think it's a dangerous myth to propagate, this concept of weakness versus strength. I understand, hey, you don't want to come off as wishy-washy. You don't want to come off as having no direction. And I think there's some great analysis in here of the way that these words can be used poorly, but again, it's a clickbait title, right? And
Mhm.
it sets out a premise that I didn't entirely agree with from the outset.
Yeah, and here's my take on it. They're just giving us a different perspective in using these words, and let's take number 4, guess. And look, um, our best guess is that our profits for the year's end will be marginally better than last year's, or we expect our profit for the year to be ahead of last year's, or our results should surpass last year. What's more believable? Look, our profits are up over last year 15.88%. It's the latter. The point I think what they're making, of course, is that in my, not necessarily of course, but is it, you know, if you don't know, just as you said, hey, that's a great question. I don't know. Let me get the answer because I know you wouldn't have asked it if it wasn't important to you. So then go get it versus just taking, lying or exaggerating because they're just helping, as you said earlier, that slippery slope. This is the reminder: don't do that. The way Get the right answer, and you're going to be more believable and trustworthy. If you open up immediately, I don't know the answer, and I could guess, but I'm not going to do that. Let me just get it for you. Is 24 hours good enough? That's how I. That's my take on it. I love that one. And if you're using numbers, have the numbers and go out a decimal point or two.
Yeah, like I said, there's definitely some validity in the different examples. I hope we'll get that sale. I hope
Yeah.
you'll be able to take on that assignment. Rather than inspiring confidence, hope has a prayer-like quality. It says in the article. So alternatives, I'm looking forward to a win, or I know you'll give it your all. So definitely understood that. It seemed to me, especially these are some pretty wide verbs, right?
Hmm.
They're used in, like, really hard to remove the word think from your vocabulary in the business sense.
I think you've had a good idea versus, you know what? That's an excellent proposal. What sounds better?
Yeah, that is more of a focus on self versus the other, right? When you're framing it as I think you, it's about me as opposed to just stating you have a good idea.
Right.
It's more redundant than anything else and self-referencing.
Yes.
So like I said, definitely some things in here that you would want to look out for, but that overarching focus on the idea that weakness is something that has to be rooted out and removed at all costs, I find outdated and not really all that helpful necessarily, I think is probably the best way to put it.
Well, let me share one. It's not even in here, and then I will be complete. Different cultures will say it differently. America, we say, um, let me be honest. Other cultures have heard, let me be brutally honest. And I remember I would receive that message sometimes from others, and I'd be saying to myself, what the frick? Everything up until this point, you haven't been honest?
Right. That is one that I have
Just
done a pretty good job of rooting out.
right. It might have been one of those ones in the first week we started working together back in the 90s. Dan, get rid of that from your vocabulary because it leads me to believe you haven't been honest up until this point, and it's a slippery slope.
Truthfully,
tell.
that's another one. Truthfully,
Yeah, truthfully. What?
because
You haven't been truthful
I've been
before.
totally untruthful up till now.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
if you want me to be truthful, let's flip this switch.
And here,
That is one that does, people don't really think about that reference of it.
right.
Right.
And I like this one too. Everything before the butt is good, but then once you come to the butt, if you're on the receiving end of it, it's not gonna be good 9 times out of 10.
The one of the sports radio shows that I listen to, the host always says the phrase, I don't mean disrespect, but means somebody's about to get disrespected.
Great. End with that. Why say blah blah and you can say
Right?
blah. Words have purpose. Beautifully stated. Be careful out there and choose your words wisely.
Absolutely. So we will wrap up for this week. If you have topics that you would like us to cover or questions for us, you can reach out to us via email, info@value-ability.com. Again, that's info@value-ability.com. You can also find us on social media. Our Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook links are all at value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab. Wherever you find us, please like, review, subscribe, and share. We have a really good and loyal, consistent listener base, but our growth has slowed down. So if you could do us a favor, and if you're listening to us on a regular basis, share the podcast with someone, we would very much appreciate it. Next episode 40, Philip is really going to like this one. On purpose, I have not asked our special guest how she pronounces her last name, because I know how much I tease Philip about him not being able to pronounce names correctly. And this is a tough one, so I am probably going to botch it. Karen Warzazek is my guess, but we will find out next week. She's a financial advisor out in Virginia and is going to share with us some thoughts on environmental and social investing, as well as a foundation that she has put together to help women get into positions of leadership.
Cool.
So very, very interesting story next week. Check back with us for that. What does personal responsibility mean to you? We'd love to hear from our listeners. Did we miss anything? What stories do you have about personal responsibility? Reach out to us, let us know, and we will share those in upcoming episodes. As always, thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next week, and remember that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. This is a podcast collaboration, not a peer-reviewed journal or a sponsored publication. We make no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this podcast, and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information, or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. It is the listener's responsibility to verify their own facts. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on this podcast. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Investors may get back less than invested. Investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You must make an independent decision regarding investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast. Before acting on information on this podcast, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances and strongly consider seeking advice from your own financial or investment advisor. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions are not reflective of the position of any entity other than the authors, and since we are critically thinking human beings, these views are always subject to change, revision, and rethinking at any time. Please do not hold us to them in perpetuity.